The leaders of the US, India, Australia and Japan are in Tokyo for the Quad Summit. The war in Ukraine, climate change, regional security and trade, just some of the issues being discussed. The informal alliance of four nations is aimed at countering China's influence across the Asia-Pacific region. During the meeting, US President Joe Biden said Russia's invasion of Ukraine shows the importance of the Quad.
Shortly before Russia launched its invasion, my administration published our Indo-Pacific strategy to advance a free, open, connected, secure, and resilient Indo-Pacific. Russia's assault on Ukraine only heightens the importance of those goals. The fundamental principles of international order, territorial integrity and sovereignty, international law, human rights, must always be defended, regardless of where they're violated in the world.
Rob McBride says China has reacted negatively to what it considers the motivations for the summit.
China suspects that all of the adversaries meeting like this in a gang and effectively ganging up on it is meant to constrain its development in what it regards as its own backyard. But especially after Biden's comments yesterday, Monday, when he said that the US, yes, would intervene militarily to stop China from invading Taiwan. People are still trying to work out exactly how serious he was with that comment or whether it was a case of awkward misspeak. But certainly if China was irked beforehand, it is certainly irked now. And it always regards this with deep suspicion, because when you look at the kinds of things that they are talking about when it comes to regional security, they all does seem to be aimed directly or indirectly towards China. For example, the setting up of telecommunications systems which are robust, which are secure. How do you do that with 5G and then 6G? Reading between the lines, it is these allies saying, how do we do that without having to call upon Chinese telecommunications giants like Huawei, for example, which there is a certain amount of distrust over. Then again, the sourcing of goods from this part of the world. How can you make sure that there is no forced labor involved? Again, that seems to be a shorthand way of saying let's not buy anything from Xinjiang. And finally, they will be looking, for example, at maritime surveillance, at how to detect and prevent illegal fishing. Well, that seems to be illegal Chinese fishing because they would seem to be allegedly the biggest culprits when it comes to flouting maritime regulations with its big industrialized fishing fleets across the Pacific and Indian Oceans.
Let's talk to Allan Behm. He's the director of the International and Security Affairs Programme at the Australia Institute. Joins us live from Canberra. Good to have you with us. So when Joe Biden at the beginning of the summit talks about the importance of keeping the Indo-Pacific region open and free, it's understood he's talking about China. Practically speaking, what can the Quad do to limit Chinese influence?
Well, that's the big question, and that's why the Quad leaders are meeting in Tokyo. China is a big issue. It's a big issue globally, and it's certainly a very big issue for the Pacific. And so it's important that the Quad leaders, in working out how to deal with China and its rise as a preeminent economic and increasingly strategic power, focus not just on containment of China's power, but also work out how they and the neighbourhood are able to work with China. And at this point, I think they're feeling their way. The Quad is, I think, quite experimental. And to this point, I don't think that the four partners have really worked out how they're going to collaborate, both to improve the effectiveness of the international rules-based order, which President Biden spoke about, but at the same time to ensure that China is not problematic, but is constructive in the way in which the global economy and the global strategic balance works. So it's a big question that they're trying to deal with.
How much unity is there in the Quad over things from Ukraine? We've seen India take a different position than the US, to climate change. We're looking at a new Australian Prime Minister coming on board who's got a very different orientation from some of the other major polluters, if we could call them, in the Quad.
Yep. A really good question, Sammy. I mean, I think you'd have to start off by saying that there's not a lot of disunity in the Quad. The issues which hold the Quad together at the moment are essentially geostrategic issues. That's not to say that climate is not a geostrategic issue. It most certainly is. And that, of course, is a very big test for all of the Quad members, but particularly India, the United States and Australia, which are very big emitters. And it's a big test for China as well. And it's a test that all of the interested groups, including China, have got to work together on rather than working against each other. So your question goes to the heart of where the Quad needs to go. And it really does need to focus on those issues that they're able to make an improvement in the life of the people who live in the Indo-Pacific. And that must focus around climate and around the long-term management of pandemics. So those big issues are not yet in the frame of the Quad dialogue. And I suspect that until the Quad manoeuvres itself into those very relevant questions, it will be of limited significance.
All right, here's another question I think that will go to the heart. I think you're going to like this one as well. Is this grouping really about international order, democracy, and human rights, as Joe Biden put it in his opening speech? Human rights must always be defended, regardless of where they're violated in the world. Is it really about that, or is it about power? Because when you look at just the image there, and you see Joe Biden standing next to, for example, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, the leader of a party whose members talk about Muslims as a green virus. Respected institutions have described his rule as leading India towards a democratic backsliding. And, you know, the guy himself, a member of the RSS, which has been accused of stoking anti-Muslim pogroms and terrorism and assassinations. You've got to wonder, how much is this really about democracy and human rights?
Well, that's another really excellent question, Sami. It's about all of those things, I think. But the language that President Biden used is rather limited in its scope, I think. It's all very well, I think, for countries like the United States and Japan and Australia and India to talk about defending human rights. But it's equally important, I think, that they should be thinking about advocating and promoting human rights and doing the sorts of things that lead other countries to have a much gentler human rights regime. So that the conversation, I think, that needs to be conducted with China is not a conversation built around aggressive criticism of China's human rights record, which is not a good one, by the way, but it needs to be much more encouraging of China to ameliorate its position, because ultimately countries which are successful are countries where human rights are honoured and promoted, and as well as being protected. So it requires a bit of a difference in the way in which the Quad members think about the future, rather than concentrating simply on those things that have been problematic in the past. And that is as much true for Australia as it is for any of the other three members, given that we are the newest leader, at least, to join in a Quad dialogue.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis on that.
Thank you, Sami.